welcome back to another episode of Coffee with April. This time, which we haven't done enough, I think I want to go closer into espresso. So espresso is still the brew method that most coffee drinks in the world are being used at, especially in coffee shops and so on. So there's a few kind of things that we consider quite a lot here at April when we brew espresso. Almost all of it when it comes to brewing coffee in general, same with filter coffee, comes down to flow rate. Flow rate is basically how do the water go through the coffee. There's a lot of different theories, there's a lot of different ideas about this. Flow rate accumulates in some kind of total extraction. Obviously there's a few kind of key trigger points that we're looking at here, which is pressure, being that we have an espresso machine. Traditional pressure is 9 bar. Temperature, which is often somewhere between 91 and 93 degrees on a traditional setup. Basket size, very important, which accumulates into surface area and probably one of the more kind of important aspects behind flow rate. So let's start to talk a bit about the basket. We're going to talk a bit about the grinders and so on as well, and extraction ranges that we're looking at also. So first of all, when we're talking about baskets, there's a few different ones. The VST ridgeless is preferred, again, to control the flow rate a bit better. What kind of basket size you use, in our world, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the ratio to coffee in basket size. So quite often we're talking about being -1 gram from the actual basket size. So what I'm holding here is a standard La Marzocco issue 17 gram basket size. So if I were to brew espresso on this one, I would use 16 grams. Now, how much coffee I'm using also differs a bit on how old is my roast. So basically the fresher the coffee, the more the coffee is gonna swell up. It's also true that the darker the coffee, for example. So depending on how much gas you actually build up in your roast profile, that will change. Meaning, if you brew a fresher coffee, let's say day 3, day 5 from roast, I would have even less coffee in the basket, maybe go down to 15 grams, which would be -2 grams in the specific basket. And the reason for that is because the coffee is going to swell up a lot more. And you need to give the coffee room to do that, because if not, the coffee is going to press up towards the screen and you're not going to have an even flow rate. An even flow rate is probably the most important part when it comes to taste of coffee. That's why, for example, when we brew espresso, even though we have, let's say, TDS targets and extraction targets, we're usually targeting 8 as a TDS or 8.5, so 8 to 8.5 is the TDS range, using ratios of often 1 to 2.4, 1.2.2, a bit depending on coffee. Referencing brew times. Brew times is often depending on grinder, but brew times around 25 seconds. So we say we're closer to 20-25 than 25 to 30, for example. Again, a bit depending on what we're working with and how we're working with it as well. Distribution tools, tamping, something that we find quite often. I mean, I think we all like the idea of a distribution tool because it looks really even. And especially when you're competing, that's something that's been really vastly integrated, mainly because it does actually increase your tech scores. Should you use it in everyday? Yeah, sure, why not? I think the most successful thing that I've seen so far is tampers that regulates how far down you can tamp, so that everyone using the same tamper will actually have the same pressure. If you dial that in properly, I think that's one of the better improvements when it comes to espresso. It's a really interesting thing, and I think it's a really cool thing to use as well. Now, overall, what I think about and what is very important as well is something that we reference a lot is temperature. So traditionally we're up around 93, 94 degrees on an espresso machine, and I prefer to see that closer to 90 than anything else. We often talk about pressures, we talk about pressure profiling, we're talking about pre-infusion, stuff like that. Personally, I never ever tried an espresso that tastes better because of pressure profiling. I never tasted an espresso that tastes better because of pre-infusion. It could be that it's more consistent because it gives the water more time to kind of generate an even bed of coffee grounds in the basket, which I can appreciate. But I don't necessarily see how it makes the coffee tastier. However, I did experience a few espressos, and we've been playing around with it as well, that are brewed on a different bar continuously. So moving away from a 9 bar kind of stable pressure. And I think down to 8, maybe even 7.5 is really interesting and can create a really tasty coffee. I mean, we should reference that our espressos are still supposed to be a light to medium body beverage. I don't want it to be as my filter coffee, because filter coffee is for me something else. So balance, sweet, clean, vibrant, modern, definitely lower body than what any traditional espresso would have. But still with a body, right? So you want a mouthfeel and a texture to the espresso. Let's continue and kind of generalize a bit more as well. As I almost always say, is that a lighter roasted coffee should be brewed with a lower brew ratio. Otherwise you lose too much body, lose too much flavor intensity. So then I will probably be down to 1.2. So let's say we take the April filter coffee and we brew espresso with that. I would probably take a 1.2 brew ratio and push that in a slightly longer time, so between 25 and 30 seconds. If I take an April espresso, I'll do that in 1 to 2.2 or 1.2.4, depending on the coffee, and I'll put that extraction time between 20 and 25 seconds. If I push April milk espresso and I want that as a base, and I push that at 2.2 as a brew ratio, and I put that as a 25% brew time. So there is a bit of idea that goes into this. Most importantly, give the coffee room in the basket. Mind the flow, which is difficult because it's something we can't see, and when we can't see it, we don't necessarily think about it. But for anyone that's been brewing a lot of manual pour overs, the flow rate and how you pour makes a huge difference on the coffee. So how the water goes through the ground coffee makes a huge difference on the taste experience, and that's true for espresso as well. Now that was kind of a first introduction to espresso here at April. We're gonna do more of these. If you guys have more specific questions to us, just shoot us a comment down here. We're always happy to answer, as you guys know. Thank you guys for tuning in.